When we think about growing our food, our eyes usually go up, right? We look at the corn stalks, the wheat, the fruit hanging on the vine. But today, we're going to look down. We're digging into the ground, past the roots, and into this incredibly complex living world we usually just call, well, dirt. Because here's a thought. What if we've been looking at this whole thing kind of backwards? What if the real secret isn't just about feeding the plant, but about feeding the tiny, microscopic world that powers that plant to begin with? That is the big question we are digging into today, all through the lens of a really cool study from southern China. So to really get what's going on, you have to meet the real farmers at work down there. And no, they're not people. They're this invisible underground engine made up of trillions and trillions of microorganisms. Yeah, you heard that right. In just one handful of healthy soil, there are more living things than there are people on the entire planet. It's wild. And these little microscopic workers, we're talking bacteria, fungi, all sorts of stuff, are constantly at work, breaking down organic matter, unlocking nutrients, and basically serving them up on a platter for plants to use. Without them, soil is just lifeless dust. Okay, so for a long time, we've had this big debate about the best way to supercharge this invisible engine. It really comes down to a tale of two totally different ways of feeding our soil. On one side, you've got your organic manure. This is the old school traditional method. Think of it like a rich, complex stew that not only delivers nutrients, but actually improves the physical structure of the soil itself. And on the other side, modern chemical fertilizers. These are more like a targeted energy drink. Bam! Delivering specific nutrients like nitrogen right to the plant, super fast and super efficient. For years, the argument has always been about which one gives us a better crop yield. But these scientists in China, they wanted to ask a different question. They asked, which method is actually better for the health and the variety of all that microscopic life inside the soil? So, to find out, they set up this amazing experiment. And listen, this was not some quick test in a petri dish. They took this to the field, and they settled in for the long haul. For 3 solid years, in a rice paddy field, researchers applied different fertilizer strategies over and over. They didn't want to see just a temporary blip. They wanted to see a real, lasting change in the soil's fundamental character. They basically set up 5 competing teams. First, you had the control team, which got no nitrogen fertilizer at all. Then there was the MO team. They went 100% chemical. The M30 and M50 teams tried a hybrid approach, mixing it up. And finally, the M100 team used nothing but organic manure. Now, here's the really crucial part. Every single team, except for the control, got the exact same total amount of nitrogen. The only thing that was different was where it came from. So after those 3 years, they gathered up the soil and they dove into the DNA of these microbial communities. And wow, what they found tells such a powerful story about what's really happening right under our feet. But hey, before we meet the tiny residents, let's check out the house they live in. Because the fertilizer didn't just change the food on the table, it literally renovated the entire neighborhood. The key thing to look at here is something called soil organic carbon. Just think of it as the foundation of a healthy soil home. It helps hold water, it improves the structure, and it's a long-term food source. And as you can see, it's pretty clear. The more manure they added, the more carbon got stored in the soil. That all-manure group, M100, built the richest, most awesome home for these microbes. So, who decided to move into these different homes? Well, in the soil that was fed only chemical fertilizer, the neighborhood was pretty much taken over by what scientists call oligotrophs. These are the hardy survivors, the microbes that are really good at just getting by when resources are scarce. But now, look at the soil that got fed only manure. It's a completely different world. Here, the nutrient-loving groups like proteobacteria and actinobacteria absolutely took over. This isn't just a tiny shift, folks. This is a complete demographic overhaul of the entire microbial city. So why the huge change? Well, it all comes down to their diet. The bacteria that loved the manure soil are what scientists call copiotrophs. Basically, they're nutrient lovers who absolutely thrive when there's a rich, complex feast. The ones in the chemical-only soil, they're oligotrophs, those hardy survivors we talked about. It's simple, really. You change the menu, you're gonna change the customer. And it wasn't just the bacteria either. The fungi community changed in a big way too. In the plots that only got chemicals, one main group of fungi just dominated everything. But as soon as manure was added to the mix, all these other beneficial fungi started to boom, creating a much more balanced and complex fungal network. And all of this leads us to this really critical idea in any ecosystem: biodiversity. I mean, just like in a rainforest or a coral reef, having a whole bunch of different species makes the entire system stronger, more stable, and way more resilient to change. And guess what? The exact same thing is true for the world under our feet. So, did the manure actually make the soil more biodiverse? Oh, you bet it did. The study found that the all-manure treatment cranked up the bacterial richness, that's the number of different species, by over 11% compared to the soil that got nothing. It was literally making the soil more alive. Okay, so what is the big takeaway from all this? Is the answer just manure good, chemical fertilizer bad? Well, the study's conclusion is actually a lot more interesting and honestly a lot more practical than that. This quote, straight from the paper, really hits the nail on the head. The point isn't about picking a side in some fertilizer war. The scientist actually found that combining the two is the most effective strategy. Those hybrid groups, the M30 and M50, they also saw huge boosts in microbial health and diversity. The best way to think about it is like a recipe. First, you start with organic manure as your base ingredient. That builds the healthy home and provides that slow-release feast for all the microbes. Then, you supplement with some targeted chemical fertilizer to give the growing plants that quick jolt of energy they need right when they need it most. And the result? It's a total win-win for both the microbes and the crops. So in the end, this study really shows us that the debate shouldn't be either or. It's about creating a balanced diet for the soil itself. We have to stop thinking only about feeding the plant and start thinking about cultivating the entire living ecosystem that holds it all up. And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. As we look for ways to sustainably feed a growing world, maybe the next great agricultural revolution won't come from a new type of seed or some fancy new machine, but from finally understanding and feeding the invisible engine that's been powering our food all along.